The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor of the executive suite, sending shards of porcelain and dark liquid sprawling across the pristine white tiles. Nobody moved. Not the 3 board members frozen mid-sentence around the conference table, not the trembling assistant who'd brought the wrong order, and certainly not Katherine Chen, who stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle, her reflection showing a woman who'd learned long ago that showing weakness was the same as signing your own resignation letter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge the mess. Just continued staring at the Space Needle piercing through the morning fog as if it held answers to questions she'd stopped asking years ago. "Clean it up," she said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of cold precision that made interns cry in bathroom stalls. "And Janet, when I say black coffee, I mean black coffee. Not whatever caramel vanilla abomination you just handed me. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Ms. Chen," the assistant whispered, already on her knees with a handful of napkins, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pick up the larger pieces. Katherine finally turned, her steel gray suit matching the storm clouds gathering outside. She was 38 but looked both younger and infinitely older depending on the light. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a permanent expression of mild disapproval, and eyes that had seen too many people smile to her face while sharpening knives behind her back. "Meeting adjourned," she announced, cutting off whatever Greg from finance had been about to say. "We'll reconvene when people remember how to do their jobs properly." The board members scattered like startled birds, and Katherine returned to her windows, to her kingdom of glass and steel and carefully constructed walls. Below, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware that the woman who'd built TechVantage from a failing startup into a $2 billion enterprise was currently wondering if she'd accidentally fired everyone who'd ever been genuinely competent or if she'd simply never hired them in the first place. Her phone buzzed. Another message from her mother. Another reminder of the upcoming charity gala. Another expectation she'd have to meet while pretending she hadn't spent the last 6 months uncovering an embezzlement scheme that had cost the company $4 million and her last shred of faith in humanity. The betrayer had been Marcus. Her college roommate's brother. The man she'd promoted 3 times. The person she'd trusted with her passwords, her strategies, her vulnerabilities during late-night planning sessions when they'd dreamed about changing the tech industry together. He'd taken the money and disappeared to Costa Rica, leaving behind nothing but a mocking email that ended with, "You always were too trusting, Kat. That's why you'll never really make it." She'd proven him wrong about making it. Built the empire higher, stronger, more profitable than ever. But the other part, the trust, that had died with his betrayal. Now she trusted numbers, contracts, and the cold comfort of complete control. Katherine walked to her desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, retrieving a file she'd compiled over the past 3 weeks. Employee background checks. Specifically, one employee who'd raised more red flags than a communist parade but somehow kept slipping through her increasingly paranoid scrutiny. Marcus Hayes. No relation to the Marcus who'd stolen from her, but the name alone made her jaw clench. He'd applied for a position in building maintenance 4 months ago. His resume was almost laughably sparse. High school diploma from a school in Montana that had closed down. No college. No certifications. Previous employment listed as general labor with companies that no longer existed or couldn't be verified. References that led to disconnected phone numbers. Any sensible HR department would have tossed the application immediately. But her HR director, sweet elderly Patricia who believed everyone deserved a second chance, had seen something in his interview. He was polite, Patricia had written in her notes. Respectful. Said he had a daughter to support and just needed honest work. Something about him felt genuine. Katherine had nearly overridden the hire, but she'd been drowning in the aftermath of the embezzlement scandal, dealing with auditors and lawyers and board members who suddenly questioned every decision she made. One maintenance worker had seemed inconsequential. A mistake she was beginning to regret. Because Marcus Hayes was too perfect. Too quiet. Too unremarkable in a way that screamed calculated anonymity. He arrived exactly 15 minutes before his shift every night. Never called in sick. Never complained. Never socialized with other staff. He moved through the building like a ghost, leaving behind nothing but clean floors and an unsettling absence of personality. Katherine had reviewed the security footage. Hours of it. Watching him push his cleaning cart through empty hallways, mopping conference rooms, emptying trash bins. He never looked at computers left open. Never lingered near executive offices. Never did anything suspicious. Which was precisely what made him suspicious. Nobody was that invisible unless they were trying to be. She closed the file and made a decision. Tonight, she'd run her own test. Set a trap so subtle, so carefully designed, that if Marcus Hayes was hiding something, anything, she'd finally have her proof. And if he was exactly what he appeared to be, just a simple maintenance worker trying to support his daughter, then maybe, just maybe, she could stop seeing enemies in every shadow. Though she doubted it. The sky had turned the color of old bruises by the time Katherine returned to the office that evening. Most of the staff had long since gone home to their families, their normal lives, their ability to sleep without wondering who was plotting against them. She'd sent her assistant away hours ago, telling Janet she needed to work on quarterly projections undisturbed. The lie came easily. Most lies did these days. She rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The executive lounge was at the end of the east corridor, a space designed for late-night strategy sessions and impressing potential investors. Leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars. A bar stocked with bottles that had price tags requiring multiple commas. Floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the city into a glittering backdrop for power and ambition. Katherine had always loved this room. Before Marcus's betrayal, before the walls went up, she'd spent countless hours here with her small team, dreaming impossible dreams and then making them real through sheer determination and too much caffeine. Now the space felt hollow, like a museum exhibit of who she used to be. She began setting her trap with the precision of a chess master arranging pieces for checkmate. First, she placed her Prada purse on the coffee table, positioned just carelessly enough to look accidental. The wallet inside was deliberately visible, stuffed with several $100 bills, more cash than anyone sensibly carried, but exactly the kind of careless wealth that might tempt someone struggling to make ends meet. Next came the sealed envelope, marked Confidential Executive Compensation Review in bold red letters. She'd created the document specifically for this test, filled it with fabricated salary information that would be incredibly valuable to competitors or anyone looking to create discord among her leadership team. The envelope wasn't sealed tightly. A curious person could easily peek inside without leaving obvious evidence. Finally, she removed her suit jacket, draping it over the back of a chair, and loosened her hair from its severe bun. She positioned herself on the leather sofa, carefully arranging her body to look like someone who'd fallen asleep while working late. One arm draped across her eyes, breathing slow and steady, every muscle relaxed despite the tension coiling in her chest like a spring waiting to snap. The building's environmental systems hummed softly around her. Through the windows, Seattle's lights flickered like dying stars. Katherine waited, counting her breaths, wondering what kind of person she'd become that this felt necessary. That trusting someone required tests and traps instead of conversation and honesty. She heard him before she saw him. The soft squeak of wheels on marble, the gentle swish of a mop being wrung out. Marcus Hayes making his nightly rounds, unaware that tonight was different. That tonight, someone was watching. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped. Katherine could feel him in the doorway, could sense the shift in air pressure that came with another person's presence. She kept her breathing even, her body still, playing her part in this elaborate theater of distrust. The cartwheels moved again, rolling into the room. He was coming closer. Her heartbeat accelerated despite her efforts to stay calm. This was it. The moment of truth. Would he see the money and take it? Would he open the envelope? Would he prove that her cynicism was justified, that everyone had a price, that Marcus had been right about her being too trusting because she was fundamentally broken in some way that made her unable to see people's true nature? But Marcus Hayes did none of those things. Instead, Katherine heard a soft rustling sound, followed by gentle footsteps approaching the sofa. Not sneaking, not hesitant, just steady and purposeful. Then came a weight, settling carefully across her shoulders. Fabric, soft and worn, carrying the faint scent of laundry detergent and something else, something that reminded her of her father's workshop before he died, sawdust and honest work. His jacket. He'd covered her with his jacket. She felt him move away, heard more rustling, then footsteps receding. The cartwheels squeaked again, growing fainter. And then, so quietly she almost missed it, a whispered sentence that made her breath catch in her throat. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Some people deserve to rest without being tested. The door clicked shut. The room fell silent except for the building's ambient hum and Katherine's suddenly thundering heartbeat. She waited 30 seconds, then 60, making sure he was truly gone before she opened her eyes and sat up slowly, his jacket still draped across her shoulders. It was old, worn at the elbows, the kind of garment someone kept wearing because they couldn't afford to replace it or because it held memories too precious to discard. The fabric was soft from countless washings, and when she brought it closer, she caught that scent again. Not cologne or anything artificial. Just clean cotton and the ghost of whatever life Marcus Hayes lived outside these walls. Katherine looked at the coffee table. The wallet was untouched, bills still visible. The envelope remained sealed, exactly as she'd left it. And next to them sat something she hadn't placed there, a small book, one of the paperbacks from the staff break room, positioned carefully over the envelope as if shielding it from view. As if protecting her secrets even though she'd never asked for protection. She picked up the book, hands trembling slightly. It was old, cover creased from multiple readings. The Velveteen Rabbit. A children's story about a toy that becomes real through being loved. Someone had written in the margins, annotations in careful handwriting that spoke of a parent reading to a child, explaining difficult words, asking questions about what makes something truly real. Is it when someone loves you? One note asked. Or when you become brave enough to love them back? Katherine set the book down carefully, her throat tight. She stood and walked to the windows, his jacket still around her shoulders, and stared out at the city she'd conquered while somehow losing sight of everything that mattered. Below, tiny figures moved through their lives, going home to people who knew their real names and their real stories, not just the carefully curated versions they presented to the world. She pulled his jacket tighter, and for the first time in 6 months, Katherine Chen allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, not everyone was Marcus. Not everyone was waiting for a chance to betray her. Some people, impossibly rare and precious as unicorns, might actually be exactly what they appeared to be. Or Marcus Hayes was simply better at playing the long game than anyone she'd ever met. She wouldn't know which until she dug deeper. Until she uncovered whatever truth he was hiding behind that careful anonymity and those references that led nowhere. Because people didn't just appear out of thin air with no past, no connections, no digital footprint in an age where everyone left traces. Katherine pulled out her phone and typed a message to her head of security. I need a comprehensive background check on Marcus Hayes, maintenance staff. Everything you can find. Employment history, criminal records, financials, social media, associates. I want to know what he had for breakfast 10 years ago. And I want it by tomorrow morning. She hit send, then looked down at the jacket again, at the book with its marginalia about becoming real. Tomorrow she'd have answers. Tomorrow she'd know whether her instincts were right to be suspicious or if she'd finally found someone who passed a test she hadn't even realized she needed them to pass. Tonight, though, she stood alone in her tower of glass and ambition, wearing a stranger's jacket, and wondered which would hurt more, discovering he was another betrayal waiting to happen, or discovering he was genuine and realizing how far she'd fallen that genuine kindness felt like a threat. The morning came too quickly, arriving with weak sunlight that did nothing to warm the chill in Katherine's corner office. She'd gone home around 3 a.m., showered, changed into a fresh suit, this one charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, and returned before the building officially opened. She hadn't slept. Couldn't, with questions circling her mind like vultures waiting for something to die. Her head of security, James Park, a former FBI analyst who'd taken early retirement to make 3 times his government salary in private sector work, arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. He carried a tablet and wore the expression of someone who'd spent the night chasing digital ghosts through databases and coming up mostly empty-handed. "You're not going to like this," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk without waiting for an invitation. They'd worked together long enough that certain formalities had been abandoned. Katherine took a sip of her coffee, the real kind, black and bitter enough to strip paint. "Show me." James tapped his tablet, and the screen filled with Marcus Hayes's employee photo. The image showed a man in his early 40s with brown hair starting to gray at the temples, blue eyes that somehow managed to look both weary and kind, and the sort of face that disappeared in crowds. Not handsome, not ugly, just aggressively average in a way that made Katherine's suspicions flare even hotter. "Marcus Hayes," James began, age 42 according to his application, though I can't verify that because here's where it gets interesting. He has no birth certificate on file with any state database. No Social Security earnings record before 4 years ago. No credit history, no previous addresses, no nothing before he apparently materialized in Seattle with a daughter and applied for low-wage jobs. Katherine leaned forward. "That's impossible. Everyone leaves traces." "You'd think so," James agreed. "But Marcus Hayes, if that's even his real name, is either very good at staying hidden or he's using an identity that didn't exist before 2021. The Social Security number checks out as valid, but it has minimal activity. He pays taxes on his maintenance job, has a basic checking account, rents a small apartment in Beacon Hill under a month-to-month lease. No car registration, no property ownership, no criminal record, no lawsuits, no marriage license, no divorce decree, nothing." "What about the daughter?" Katherine asked. "Sophie Hayes, age 7. Enrolled at Beacon Hill Elementary. Birth certificate lists Marcus Hayes as father, but the mother's name is listed as Amanda Hayes, deceased. I tried to track Amanda Hayes, but it's one of the most common name combinations in America, and without a social security number or date of birth, it's impossible to narrow down. The death certificate, if it exists, isn't in Washington state records." James swiped to another screen showing surveillance photos he'd apparently taken outside Marcus's apartment building. The images showed a small girl with dark curly hair, wearing a bright yellow raincoat, holding Marcus's hand as they walked to a bus stop. Her backpack was decorated with unicorn patches, and she was looking up at her father with the kind of adoration that made Katherine's chest ache in a way she didn't want to examine. "So what you're telling me," Katherine said slowly, "is that Marcus Hayes is a ghost." "Or someone running from something," James replied. "People don't erase their pasts that thoroughly unless they have a reason. Witness protection, maybe. Or he's hiding from someone. Could be an abusive ex, could be debts, could be he committed a crime somewhere and rebuilt under a new identity." Katherine studied the photos. In one, Marcus was crouched down, readying Sophie's shoe. In another, he was helping her onto the bus, one hand steadying her back. In a third, they were visible through a window, sitting at a small kitchen table, the girl apparently doing homework while Marcus stirred something on a stove. Every image radiated a kind of quiet devotion that seemed at odds with someone living a lie. "What does your gut tell you?" Katherine asked. James was quiet for a long moment. "My gut says he's not a threat to TechVantage. Whatever he's running from, it's personal, not professional. But my brain says people who hide this well learn to hide for a reason, and you don't want to get caught in the crossfire when the past catches up." Katherine nodded slowly. "Keep monitoring him. I want to know where he goes, who he talks to, what he does on his days off. But be subtle about it. If he's as aware as I think he is, he'll notice if you're too obvious." "Already on it," James said, standing. But Kat, he added, using the nickname only her oldest colleagues were permitted, maybe consider just talking to the guy. Ask him directly why his background is so thin. You might be surprised what honesty gets you. She gave him a look that could have frozen nitrogen. When has honesty ever gotten me anything except betrayed? James sighed. That's what I thought you'd say. He headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I watched hours of security footage of this guy. He doesn't act like someone casing the joint. He acts like someone who's tired and trying his best and probably dealing with more than we can imagine. Sometimes a maintenance worker is just a maintenance worker. After James left, Katherine pulled up the security feeds on her computer, scrolling through archived footage from the past 4 months. She watched Marcus arrive each night, always through the employee entrance, always alone. He'd change into his work uniform in the maintenance locker room, methodical and efficient. Then he'd begin his rounds, floor by floor, room by room. She watched him clean executive bathrooms with the same care he gave to storage closets. Watched him notice a wobbly chair in a conference room and spend 15 minutes tightening the bolts even though it wasn't technically his job. Watched him reorganize the cleaning supply closet with a precision that suggested either military training or obsessive-compulsive tendencies. And she watched him interact with the few people who crossed his path during night shifts. A security guard who always got a respectful nod. A software engineer working late who Marcus brought coffee to without being asked, somehow knowing exactly how she took it after seeing her make it once in the break room. A janitor from the day shift who was still learning the ropes, who Marcus spent an extra hour helping even though he wasn't paid for training. In every interaction, Marcus was polite, helpful, and forgettable. He never tried to extend conversations beyond what was necessary. Never asked personal questions. Never offered information about himself. He existed in that perfect sweet spot of being just visible enough not to seem suspicious while remaining just invisible enough not to be memorable. It was masterful, really. If you weren't looking for it. Katherine's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia in HR. Her morning meeting in 10 minutes, don't forget. Employee satisfaction survey results. She sighed and closed the security feeds, but her mind stayed on Marcus Hayes as she gathered her materials and headed to the conference room. Who was he, really? What was he hiding? And why did the thought of uncovering his secrets make her feel less like a protective CEO and more like a bully about to destroy something fragile and possibly beautiful? The conference room was already full when she arrived. Department heads arranged around the long table like judges at a trial, all of them watching her with varying degrees of wariness. She'd earned that wariness through years of demanding excellence and accepting nothing less. She used to think it meant respect. Lately, she'd begun to wonder if it was just fear. Patricia stood at the head of the table, projector ready, her gentle smile in place. Patricia was 63, grandmotherly, and possessed the superpower of actually caring about employees as human beings rather than resources to be optimized. Katherine had tried to fire her twice, but Patricia had calmly refused to leave, saying someone needed to remind Katherine that spreadsheets didn't have feelings but people did. Good morning everyone, Patricia began. I'll keep this brief since I know we're all busy. The annual employee satisfaction survey results are in, and overall, we're seeing improvement in most areas. She clicked through slides showing graphs and percentages. Compensation satisfaction up by 8%. Benefits approval up by 12%. Management trust, that one had a much smaller increase, up by 3%. Katherine noted that with a mixture of satisfaction and something that might have been shame if she'd let herself feel it. But there's something interesting I wanted to highlight, Patricia continued, clicking to a new slide. This year we added open-ended questions about workplace culture, and we've been getting an unusual number of mentions for someone in facilities maintenance. Katherine's attention sharpened. The slide showed a word cloud generated from survey responses, and one name appeared larger than all the others, Marcus. She clicked to the next slide, this one showing actual quotes from employees. He fixed the coffee maker in our break room on his own time after it broke. He always smiles and says good morning even though he's usually leaving as we're arriving. He helped me carry boxes to my car when I was moving apartments and refused to accept any payment. He noticed I was stressed about a project and left a chocolate bar on my desk with a note saying tomorrow would be better. Patricia smiled. It seems Marcus Hayes has made quite an impression on staff, even though most of them don't really know him. He's become something of a guardian angel for the building. People appreciate that he genuinely seems to care about making their work environment better. Katherine felt eyes turning toward her, waiting for a response. She kept her face carefully neutral even as something twisted uncomfortably in her chest. That's good to hear, she said evenly. Employee morale is important. Patricia, please send Marcus a commendation letter for his file. Maybe a small bonus. Already done, Patricia said cheerfully. And I should mention, he tried to refuse the bonus. Said he was just doing his job. I had to practically force him to accept it, and even then he asked if we could donate it to the company scholarship fund instead. The room went quiet. Katherine's predecessor had started a scholarship fund for employees' children, but it had been largely forgotten in recent years, existing mostly as a line item in the annual budget that got smaller every year. He asked about the scholarship fund? Katherine heard herself ask. Patricia nodded. Apparently his daughter is 7, and he's already thinking about college. He wanted to know if the fund would still exist in 10 years, if it was something employees could rely on. I told him the truth, that it depends on company performance and board approval. He looked disappointed but thanked me anyway. Katherine made a note on her tablet even though she didn't need to. This detail, like all the others, would be burned into her memory. Later, she'd pull it out and examine it like a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. Was it genuine concern for his daughter's future? Or was it reconnaissance, trying to understand company finances and long-term planning? She was so tired of this. Tired of analyzing every gesture for hidden meaning. Tired of measuring kindness against calculation. Tired of being the woman who'd built an empire but couldn't accept a jacket draped across her shoulders without suspecting ulterior motives. The meeting continued, but Katherine barely heard it. Her mind was elsewhere, in a modest apartment in Beacon Hill where a man with no verifiable past was raising a daughter who drew unicorns and believed in tomorrow. In the building's night-quiet hallways where that same man mopped floors and left chocolate bars and apparently saw people clearly enough to know exactly what small gestures might brighten their days. She thought about the book he'd left, The Velveteen Rabbit, with its questions about becoming real. About love and transformation and the courage it took to let yourself be seen. And she made a decision that would change everything, though she didn't know it yet. Tonight, she'd go back to the office. Not to set another trap. Not to catch him in a lie. But to do something she hadn't done in longer than she cared to admit. She'd have an honest conversation. She'd return his jacket, look him in the eye, and simply ask, "Who are you, Marcus Hayes?" And maybe, just maybe, she'd find the courage to answer the same question about herself. The rain started just after sunset, turning Seattle's streets into mirrors that reflected neon and headlights and streaks of color that looked almost beautiful if you didn't have to walk through them. Katherine stood in the parking garage, holding Marcus's jacket in a garment bag she'd had her assistant pick up from the dry cleaners. The jacket had been cleaned, pressed, and probably looked better now than it had in years. She wondered if he'd appreciate that or resent it, this evidence that she'd kept something of his for 3 days while having it professionally handled like it mattered. Her Mercedes sat in its reserved spot, sleek and black and worth more than most people made in a year. She'd bought it after the company went public, a symbol of success that now felt like a symbol of distance. How many spaces existed between her life and Marcus Hayes's life? Between imported leather seats and bus stops in the rain? Between corner offices and cleaning carts? She got in the car but didn't start the engine. Instead, she sat in the dim garage lighting, the garment bag draped across the passenger seat, and tried to remember the last time she'd been genuinely nervous about a conversation. Board meetings didn't make her nervous. Investor pitches didn't make her nervous. Firing executives who'd betrayed her trust didn't make her nervous. but the thought of walking up to a maintenance worker and having an honest conversation about who he was and why he'd shown her kindness made her hands tremble slightly on the steering wheel. Katherine checked her phone. It was 7:30. Marcus's shift started at 8. She could wait until he'd settled into his routine, then intercept him somewhere private. The executive lounge, maybe. Or perhaps somewhere less intimidating, less corporate. The maintenance break room? No, that felt invasive, entering his territory uninvited. Maybe she could just wait near the service entrance, catch him when he arrived. She groaned and let her head fall back against the headrest. When had she become this person? This woman who planned conversations like military operations, who strategized basic human interaction, who couldn't just walk up to someone and say thank you for being kind to me when I was testing you because I've forgotten how to believe in decency. Her phone rang, her mother's face filling the screen. Katherine considered letting it go to voicemail, but guilt and habit made her answer. "Katherine, darling, have you finalized your +1 for the gala?" Her mother asked without preamble. "Table arrangements are due tomorrow, and I cannot have empty seats at our table. It looks dreadful." "I'll be attending alone," Katherine said, the same answer she'd given to this question for the past 5 years. "You can't keep doing this," her mother said, and Katherine heard the familiar edge of disappointment that had scored the background music of her entire life. "You're 38 years old, successful, beautiful when you make an effort. But you're going to wake up one day and realize you've built an empire with no one to share it with." "I'm fine, Mom." "Are you? Because you sound exhausted. When's the last time you took a real vacation? When's the last time you went on a date? When's the last time you did anything except work and worry?" Katherine closed her eyes. "I have to go. There's something I need to take care of." "Work," her mother said flatly. "It's always work. You know what your father said before he died? He said he was proud of what you'd built, but he wished you'd learn to build a life too." "There's a difference, Katherine." The line went dead, and Katherine sat in the silence that followed, her mother's words hanging in the air like accusations. Or maybe like truths she'd been avoiding. She thought about her penthouse apartment with its designer furniture and its emptiness. She thought about her calendar, color-coded and packed with meetings but containing no dinner with friends, no coffee dates, no movie nights. She thought about Sophie Hayes's drawing visible through a lit window, 3 figures under an umbrella, and wondered when she'd last drawn anything, imagined anything, hoped for anything beyond the next quarterly earnings report. Katherine started the car and drove out of the garage into the rain-soaked streets of Seattle. She didn't head home. Instead, she found herself driving toward Beacon Hill, toward the address James had included in his report. She told herself she was just doing reconnaissance, understanding the full picture. But she knew it was more than that. She needed to see how Marcus lived when he wasn't at work, needed to understand the context of the man who'd covered her with his jacket and asked for nothing in return. The apartment building was exactly what the report had described. Old but maintained, the kind of place where working families scraped by on modest incomes and children played in small courtyards. Katherine parked down the street, feeling increasingly like a stalker, and watched the building's entrance through rain-streaked windows. She didn't have to wait long. At 7:45, Marcus emerged from the building holding Sophie's hand. The girl wore that same bright yellow raincoat, and Marcus carried a small umbrella that he angled entirely over his daughter, leaving his own shoulders exposed to the rain. They walked to the bus stop, and Katherine watched as Marcus knelt down to Sophie's level, saying something that made the girl laugh and throw her arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Then they waited. The bus was late. Rain soaked through Marcus's thin jacket, darkening the fabric across his shoulders and back. Sophie noticed and tried to share the umbrella, but Marcus gently redirected it over her, smiling and shaking his head. They stood that way for 10 minutes, and Katherine watched Marcus shiver slightly but never complain, never show impatience, just keep talking to Sophie about something that kept the girl animated and happy despite the weather and the late bus. When the bus finally arrived, Marcus helped Sophie up the steps, then followed, and Katherine saw through the bus windows as they found seats near the back. Marcus immediately began wiping rain from Sophie's face with his sleeve, checking her backpack to make sure nothing had gotten wet, adjusting her hood. The attentiveness was absolute, unconscious, the kind of care that came from being someone's entire world. The bus pulled away, and Katherine sat in her expensive car with its heated seats and its sound system and its complete isolation from the reality most people lived, and she cried. Not the careful, silent tears she sometimes allowed herself in private moments, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere she'd locked away years ago. She cried for the loneliness of her life. She cried for the cynicism that had replaced her ability to trust. She cried for Marcus, whoever he really was, standing in the rain so his daughter could stay dry. And she cried for herself, for the woman she'd become who couldn't accept a simple act of kindness without suspecting an angle. Eventually, the tears stopped. Katherine cleaned her face with tissues from her purse, reapplied her lipstick with hands that still shook slightly, and checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked like someone who'd been crying, which meant she looked human, which meant she looked nothing like the version of herself she usually presented to the world. She drove back to Tech Vantage, arriving just before 8. Marcus's shift would be starting soon. She took the garment bag from the passenger seat and rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, to the executive lounge where this had all begun 3 nights ago. She sat on the same leather sofa, the garment bag beside her, and waited. At 8:15, she heard the familiar squeak of cartwheels. Her heart rate picked up, and she stood, smoothing her skirt, checking her hair in the window's reflection, then stopping herself. Why was she primping? This wasn't a date. This was a conversation with an employee. A conversation she needed to have because she'd violated his trust by testing him, even if he didn't know that's what she'd been doing. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his cleaning cart parked in the hallway behind him. He wore the same gray maintenance uniform, slightly damp from the rain, and his hair was still wet. When he saw Katherine, he stopped, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something more guarded. "Miss Chen," he said, his voice neutral. "I didn't realize anyone would be working late tonight. I can come back later if you need privacy." "No," Katherine said, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "I'm here because I wanted to see you. To talk to you." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Wariness, maybe. Or resignation, like he'd been expecting this. "About what, ma'am?" Katherine picked up the garment bag and held it out. "You left this the other night. I wanted to return it." He took it slowly, unzipping the bag to reveal his jacket, now clean and pressed. He stared at it for a long moment, and when he looked up, his face was carefully blank. "You didn't need to have it cleaned." "I know," Katherine said. "I wanted to. As a thank you." "For what?" "For," she hesitated, struggling with words that should have been simple. "For covering me. When you thought I was asleep. For not taking anything. For being," she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "For being a decent person?" Marcus supplied, and there was no edge to it, just a statement of fact. "That's not something that requires thanks, Miss Chen. That's just baseline humanity." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You'd be surprised how rare baseline humanity is at my level." "Maybe," Marcus said quietly. "But that says more about your level than it does about humanity." The words landed like a punch, gentle but precise. Katherine found herself sitting down on the sofa, suddenly exhausted. Marcus hesitated, then moved his cart fully into the hallway and stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance but no longer treating her like she might break. They stood in silence for a moment, and then Katherine heard herself ask, "Who are you, Marcus Hayes?" He tilted his head slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your background check came back mostly empty. No employment history before 4 years ago. No verifiable references. No digital footprint. You're either in witness protection, running from something, or using a fake identity. So who are you really?" Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe. Or memory. Does it matter? Of course it matters, Katherine said, frustration creeping into her voice. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I can't have ghosts working in my building. Is that why you left the money out? Marcus asked softly. The wallet, the envelope? You were testing me. Katherine felt her face flush deeper. How did you know? Because, Marcus said, walking to the window and looking out at the city beyond, I've spent 4 years being invisible, and invisible people notice everything. You don't usually carry that much cash. You don't leave confidential documents unsealed. And you don't fall asleep in executive lounges without locking the door first. So yes, I knew it was a test. And you still, Katherine started. Still treated you like a human being instead of an opportunity? Marcus finished. Yes. Because that's who I choose to be, regardless of who you choose to be. The words should have felt like an attack, but they didn't. They felt like truth, clean and unvarnished and impossible to argue with. Katherine stood and walked to the window, standing beside Marcus but not looking at him, both of them reflected in the glass against the backdrop of the city. For years ago, Marcus said quietly, I was someone else. Someone with credentials and a career and a life that looked successful from the outside. And then everything fell apart in ways I couldn't control, and I had to choose between fighting to clear my name or protecting my daughter from the fallout. I chose Sophie. What happened? Katherine asked. Marcus was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, I worked in cybersecurity for a financial firm. Someone planted evidence of insider trading on my work computer. By the time I realized what was happening, my accounts were frozen, my reputation was destroyed, and my wife, Sophie's mother, she couldn't handle the pressure. The accusations, the media attention, the way our friends disappeared overnight. He stopped, his jaw working. She took her own life 3 months into the investigation. Katherine's hand went to her mouth. Marcus, I'm so sorry. The charges were dropped eventually, Marcus continued, his voice flat, emotionless in the way of someone who'd told this story too many times in his own head. They caught the real perpetrator, a colleague who needed a scapegoat. But by then, Amanda was gone, and Sophie was traumatized, and our names were still all over the internet associated with fraud and scandal. So I did what I had to do. I used every legal connection I had left to create a new identity for both of us. Marcus Hayes doesn't exist in the databases you searched because Marcus Hayes didn't exist 4 years ago. What was your real name? Katherine asked. Marcus shook his head. That person is dead. He died the day Amanda did. Marcus Hayes is who I am now. A father trying to give his daughter a childhood without reporters or questions or people looking at her differently because of things she was too young to understand. Katherine processed this, her mind racing through implications and revelations and the sudden clarity of 100 small details that now made sense. The careful anonymity. The aversion to attention. The way he moved through the building like he was trying not to disturb the air. He wasn't hiding from the law. He was hiding from the past, from the weight of tragedy and injustice, creating a pocket of safety for his daughter in a world that had shown them both how quickly everything could shatter. Does Sophie know? Katherine asked. She knows her mother died. She knows we moved to start over. She doesn't know about the accusations or the scandal. I want her to have innocence as long as possible. Want her to believe the world is fair and people are good and hard work matters. Even if I know better. Do you? Katherine turned to look at him directly. Know better? Marcus met her gaze, and she saw depths there she hadn't noticed before. Grief and strength and a weariness that came from carrying more than one person should have to carry. Some days, he admitted. But then Sophie draws a picture of us being happy, or a coworker thanks me for fixing something, or someone leaves chocolate on a stressed person's desk, and I remember that the world is what we make it. I can't control what happened to me, but I can control what I do with it. Katherine felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been frozen for longer than she wanted to acknowledge. You could have told me, she said. When I hired the investigator, when I was clearly suspicious. You could have explained. Could I? Marcus asked gently. You're Katherine Chen. You built TechVantage from nothing after your partner embezzled millions. You're famous for your zero-tolerance policy and your lack of sentiment. If I'd told you my real story, would you have believed me? Or would you have seen a liability and terminated me immediately? Katherine wanted to say she would have believed him, would have understood, would have helped. But she couldn't. Because he was right. 3 days ago, before the jacket and the book and the test she'd set, she would have fired him on the spot. Would have seen him as a risk, a potential scandal, a ghost who might attract ghosts from his past. She would have protected the company and never considered the human cost. I'm sorry, she said, and the words felt inadequate. For testing you. For investigating you. For assuming the worst. You're a CEO, Marcus said. Assuming the worst is literally your job description. No, Katherine said firmly. Being strategic is my job. Being cynical was my choice. There's a difference, and I'm tired of pretending there isn't. They stood in silence, and something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the possibility of it. The first crack in walls they'd both built for different reasons. Marcus moved toward the door, collecting his cart. I should finish my rounds. Marcus, Katherine called, and he turned back. Thank you. For covering me with your jacket. For the book. For reminding me that some people still choose decency even when they could choose advantage. He nodded, something warm flickering in his expression. Thank you for asking instead of just assuming. That's rarer than you think. After he left, Katherine sat alone in the executive lounge for a long time, staring at nothing, processing everything. She thought about Marcus standing in the rain so Sophie could stay dry. About Amanda, unable to survive the weight of false accusations. About the man who'd lost everything and chosen to become someone new rather than someone bitter. About the 1,000 small kindnesses he performed that cost him nothing but meant everything to the people who received them. And she thought about herself, about the fortress she'd built around her heart with guard towers and moats and carefully designed tests for anyone who tried to get close. About how that fortress had kept her safe but also kept her alone. About how protection and isolation were sometimes the same thing seen from different angles. Her phone buzzed. A message from James in security. Following up on your request for continued monitoring of Marcus Hayes. Do you want me to proceed with the detailed surveillance we discussed? Katherine stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed, no. Case closed. Delete all files related to this investigation. And James, if anyone ever asks, Marcus Hayes passed every background check we have. His employment record is clean and verified. Are we clear? The response came quickly. Crystal clear. Consider it done. Katherine put her phone away and walked to the windows, looking out at the city, at the thousands of lit windows containing thousands of stories she'd never know. Somewhere out there, Marcus and Sophie were probably home by now, probably eating dinner at a small kitchen table, probably talking about their days in the way families did when they had nothing to hide from each other. She pulled out her phone again and opened her contacts, scrolling to Patricia in HR. Tomorrow morning, she wanted to discuss expanding the Employee Scholarship Fund. Wanted to make it robust enough that Sophie Hayes, and children like her, would have the education their parents dreamed of giving them. It was a small thing, really. Wouldn't change the past or erase the tragedies that had brought Marcus to TechVantage. But maybe it would change the future. Maybe it would be the kind of small kindness that cost her nothing but meant everything to someone who received it. She was learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And maybe that was enough for now. The following week passed in a strange new rhythm that Katherine couldn't quite categorize. She found herself arriving at the office earlier and leaving later, her schedule mysteriously aligning with Marcus's shifts in ways she told herself were coincidental but knew weren't. She'd see him in hallways, pushing his cart, and they'd exchange brief greetings that felt weighted with everything they weren't saying. She'd watch him on security feeds, not to catch him doing something wrong, but to understand the careful choreography of how he moved through the building, noticing things no one else noticed, fixing problems before they became complaints. On Tuesday, she discovered he'd repaired a malfunctioning door lock on the women's restroom, the one on the 14th floor that had been sticking for weeks. He'd done it during his break, using tools from his personal kit, because maintenance requests went through channels that took days and the lock was a safety issue. Nobody had asked him to do it. Nobody had even mentioned it in his presence. He'd just noticed and fixed it because that's what he did. On Wednesday, Katherine found a small plant on her desk. A succulent in a plain terracotta pot with a handwritten note that said, "Even office plants need someone to remember they exist." It wasn't signed, but she knew. She placed it on the corner of her desk where afternoon light would reach it, and every time she looked at it over the following days, she found herself smiling in a way that felt foreign and right. On Thursday, TechVantage's entire internal network crashed at 2 in the afternoon. The timing was catastrophic, right in the middle of a major product demonstration for potential investors. Katherine's IT department scrambled, but nothing they tried resolved the issue. Servers that should have been responding were silent. Backup systems that should have engaged automatically remained offline. The company's entire digital infrastructure was essentially paralyzed. Katherine stood in the server room with her chief technology officer, David Martinez, and a team of increasingly panicked engineers. The investors were being entertained in a conference room with coffee and corporate small talk, but that would only last another 15 minutes before the situation became professionally humiliating. "I don't understand," David said, his face pale with stress. "Every diagnostic says the hardware is fine. The network cables are connected. The servers are running. But nothing's communicating. It's like someone physically disconnected something crucial, but we've checked everything 3 times. "Check it a 4th time," Katherine said, her voice tight. "We can't afford this failure." "Miss Chen," a voice said from the doorway, and everyone turned to see Marcus standing there, still in his maintenance uniform, holding a clipboard. "I might know what the problem is." David bristled immediately. "This is a secure technical area. Maintenance staff aren't authorized during crisis situations." "Let him speak," Katherine said, surprising herself and everyone else in the room. Marcus stepped forward, not intimidated by the roomful of people with advanced degrees and 6-figure salaries. 3 nights ago, I was cleaning the utility corridor on sublevel 2. There's a junction box there, the one that routes primary and backup network lines to the main server room. Someone left it open, which is a fire code violation, so I closed and secured it. But I noticed something odd. There was a secondary cable bundle that had been deliberately separated from the main routing. It looked like someone was preparing to create a physical bypass or interruption. David frowned. "We don't have any authorized work orders for that junction box." "Exactly," Marcus said. "I documented it in the facilities log because it seemed wrong, but I wasn't sure who to report it to. If I had to guess, someone accessed that junction box again and physically disconnected something critical. The cable layout down there is complex enough that it would take your team hours to trace every connection, but if you know what you're looking for, the fix is probably simple." Katherine met Marcus's eyes. "Can you show us?" 5 minutes later, the entire technical team was crowded into a utility corridor that most of them hadn't known existed. The space was cramped, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes, and smelled like dust and old cables. Marcus led them to a large junction box mounted on the wall, opened it with a key from his maintenance access, and pointed to a specific cable bundle. "There," he said. "That's your primary trunk line to the server room. See how it's disconnected from the routing panel? Someone pulled it manually. Reconnect it here and here, and your system should come back online immediately." David looked skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. He carefully reconnected the cables following Marcus's guidance, and within 30 seconds, the engineers' tablets and phones began lighting up with notifications. System connectivity restored. Servers responding. Network operational. The relief in the room was palpable. David stared at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "How did you know?" "I used to work in infrastructure security," Marcus said simply. You learn to read cable systems like other people read books. And I pay attention to things that seem out of place. Katherine watched the exchange, her mind racing. Someone had sabotaged their network. Someone with physical access to the building, knowledge of their systems, and a reason to want TechVantage to fail in front of investors. The embezzlement suddenly felt like it might have been just one piece of a larger puzzle. "Marcus," she said, "can I speak with you privately?" They left the others celebrating in the hallway and walked to an empty conference room nearby. Katherine closed the door and leaned against it, studying Marcus with new eyes. "You said you worked in infrastructure security. What else haven't you told me?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I told you the relevant parts. My previous career, why I left, why I started over. But not the full extent of your expertise. Not that you could diagnose and solve in 5 minutes what my entire IT department couldn't figure out in 2 hours. Does it matter?" Marcus asked. "I'm a maintenance worker now. That's the life I chose." "It matters," Katherine said, "because someone just tried to sabotage my company, and you're the only person who caught it. It matters because you've been invisible in this building for months, but you see everything. And it matters because I'm starting to think I've been asking the wrong questions." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When you work in security, you learn to notice patterns. Anomalies. Things that don't fit. That junction box being tampered with wasn't random. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Someone with access and knowledge and a specific target in mind." "My former partner," Katherine said slowly. "The one who embezzled the money. Could he still have people inside the company?" "It's possible," Marcus said. "Or it could be someone else with a grudge. But yes, the sophistication of this attack suggests inside knowledge. Not just of your physical systems, but of your schedule, your investor meetings, your vulnerabilities." Katherine felt cold. She thought the betrayal was over, that cutting out the cancer of Marcus's theft had been the end of it. But what if it hadn't been? What if there were still people inside TechVantage working against her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? "Will you help me?" she asked, the words coming out before she'd fully thought them through. "Not officially. I can't put you in a position that might expose your past. But will you keep watching? Keep noticing things? Keep telling me when something feels wrong?" Marcus studied her for a long moment. "Why would you trust me with that? You spent days investigating me, assuming I was a threat." "Because," Katherine said, "you covered me with your jacket when you could have taken advantage. You fixed a network crisis when you could have stayed silent and watched me fail. You're raising your daughter alone in an apartment that probably costs more than it should while turning down bonuses you've earned. You're either the most dedicated long-term con artist I've ever met, or you're exactly what you appear to be. And I'm choosing to believe the latter because I'm tired of assuming everyone is the former." Marcus smiled slightly, the expression transforming his usually guarded face into something warmer. "Okay," he said. "I'll keep watching. But on one condition." "Name it." "Stop watching me on the security feeds," he said. "It's kind of creepy, Miss Chen." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You knew about that?" "I noticed the camera in the west hallway panned to follow me last Tuesday when I was fixing that door lock. Cameras don't usually track maintenance staff that closely. Plus, the security room logs show extended periods of archive review from your IP address during hours when you should be home." Katherine covered her face with her hands, mortified. I was just trying to understand." "I know," Marcus said gently. "You've been hurt, and hurt people need proof before they can accept trust. I get it. But maybe now you have enough proof?" Katherine lowered her hands and nodded. "More than enough. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Marcus said. "Just maybe talk to me next time instead of surveilling me. Radical concept, I know, but it might work." Despite everything, Katherine laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded and genuine, and Marcus smiled in response. They stood there in the conference room, both of them slightly disheveled from the crisis, and something fundamental shifted. Not friendship yet, but the foundation of it. The first stones of a bridge across the distance they'd both maintained. "I should get back to work," Marcus said. "Still have 3 floors to clean before my shift ends." "Marcus," Katherine said as he reached for the door. "Thank you. Not just for today. For everything." He nodded. "You're welcome. And Katherine? You're not as alone as you think you are. You've built something incredible here. Don't let someone else's sabotage make you forget that." After he left, Katherine stood in the empty conference room and pulled out her phone. She called David directly. "I want a complete audit of everyone who has physical access to sublevel 2. Cross-reference that with anyone who worked here during the time of the embezzlement. And David, do it quietly. If we have an insider threat, I don't want them knowing we're looking." The rest of the afternoon was spent reassuring investors that the network outage had been a minor technical glitch, nothing to worry about, everything was secure. Katherine delivered the reassurances with practiced smoothness while her mind worked through darker possibilities. Someone had tried to humiliate her company in front of crucial investors. Someone had physical access and technical knowledge. Someone who either still worked at TechVantage or had maintained access after leaving. That evening, Katherine didn't go home. She went back to the security archives, but this time she wasn't watching Marcus. She was watching everyone else. Every employee who'd accessed sublevel 2 in the past month. Every maintenance worker, every IT staff member, every executive who might have had reason to be in that utility corridor. And that's when she saw it. A figure in a dark jacket and baseball cap, face angled away from cameras, accessing the junction box at 2:47 a.m., 5 days ago. The timestamp was during a period when no authorized work was scheduled. The person moved with confidence, like they knew exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid clear identification. Katherine zoomed in, enhanced the image, tried different angles. Nothing gave her a clear view of the face. But something about the build, the way the person moved, triggered a memory. She'd seen that posture before. That particular way of walking, shoulders slightly hunched, hands in pockets. She scrolled back through weeks of footage, looking for that same distinctive walk. And there, 3 weeks ago, entering the building through the main lobby during business hours. The same person, but this time without the cap. The angle caught just enough of the profile for Katherine to recognize features she'd once known well. Her breath caught. It wasn't possible. He was supposed to be in Costa Rica, living off stolen money, permanently out of her life. But there he was. Marcus Sterling. Her former partner. Her college friend's brother. The man who'd betrayed her and disappeared with $4 million. He was back, and he'd been inside TechVantage, sabotaging her systems, trying to destroy everything she'd rebuilt. Katherine's hands shook as she captured screenshots, compiled timestamps, built a file that would prove what she'd found. Then she did something she'd never expected to do. She picked up her phone and called Marcus Hayes. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Miss Chen? Is everything okay?" "No," Katherine said, her voice tight. "I need your help. Can you come to my office? Now?" "I'm at home with Sophie," Marcus said, concern evident in his tone. "What's wrong?" "The person who tried to sabotage our network today, I know who it is." "And Marcus," her voice broke slightly. "He's the one who embezzled from me before. He's back, and I don't know what he's planning, but I can't." She stopped, struggling with admitting weakness. "I can't do this alone." There was a pause, then Marcus said, "Give me 20 minutes. I'll get Sophie to a neighbor's and come straight there." "Thank you," Katherine whispered. 23 minutes later, Marcus arrived at her office still in jeans and a sweater, his hair damp from the rain that had started again. Katherine had the security footage queued up on her large monitor. She showed him everything. The sabotage at the junction box. The figure in the dark jacket. The earlier footage of Marcus Sterling entering the building. Marcus watched in silence, his expression growing darker. "That's him? The one who stole from you?" Katherine nodded. Marcus Sterling. We were close once. His sister was my roommate in college. When I started TechVantage, he was one of my first employees. I thought, she swallowed hard. I thought he believed in what we were building. Turned out he just believed in what he could take. And now he's back, Marcus said. The question is why? If he successfully stole $4 million and disappeared, why risk coming back? Why sabotage your network instead of just staying gone? Katherine had been wondering the same thing. Unless the $4 million wasn't enough. Or unless this isn't about money anymore. Maybe it's about revenge. For what? For succeeding without him, Katherine said bitterly. For building TechVantage into something even bigger after he left. For proving I didn't need him. Marcus Sterling always had an ego. Maybe watching me thrive while he's hiding in another country was too much for him to handle. Marcus studied the footage again, his expression thoughtful. Or maybe he never left at all. Maybe he's been here in Seattle this whole time, watching, planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. The possibility made Katherine's blood run cold. She'd spent months looking over her shoulder, expecting him to resurface, but eventually she'd convinced herself he was truly gone. That she was safe. That the past was behind her. Now it seemed the past had just been waiting in the shadows. What do I do? She asked, and realized it was the first time she'd asked someone else that question in years. Usually she had all the answers, made all the decisions, trusted no one's judgment but her own. But right now, sitting in her office with security footage of her worst nightmare returned to life, she genuinely didn't know what to do next. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then said, "First, you document everything. Every piece of evidence, every timestamp, every connection to the previous embezzlement. Build a case that's airtight. Then you go to the police, file a report, get legal protection in place. And if he disappears again before they can catch him? Then we make sure he can't do any more damage in the meantime," Marcus said. "I can help with that. I know how to secure systems, how to identify vulnerabilities, how to think like someone trying to infiltrate a company. Let me consult with your IT team, quietly, without explaining why. We'll shore up every possible entry point." Katherine looked at him, this man who'd walked into her life as a ghost and was now offering to help her fight actual demons from her past. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. You owe me nothing." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Because I know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. I know what it feels like to have your life's work threatened by someone else's malice. And because," he paused, "you asked for help instead of trying to handle it alone. That takes courage, Ms. Chen. I respect courage." They spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Marcus's trained eye caught details Katherine had missed, connections she hadn't made. He identified 3 other potential security breaches in the past month that could have been Marcus Sterling testing defenses, probing for weaknesses. He mapped out a comprehensive security overhaul that would take weeks to implement but would make TechVantage significantly harder to infiltrate. Around midnight, Katherine's assistant Janet appeared in the doorway with food. "I saw lights on and figured you both might need sustenance," she said, setting down bags from a nearby Thai restaurant. "Don't work yourselves to death, okay?" The conference room on the 18th floor had become their war room over the past 2 weeks. White boards covered with diagrams of network topology, printed screenshots of security footage taped to walls, and enough empty coffee cups to fill a recycling bin. Katherine stood at the window watching dawn break over Seattle while Marcus reviewed the latest access logs on his laptop. Neither of them had slept more than 4 hours in any given night since discovering Marcus Sterling's return. James and security had been brought into their confidence after Katherine verified he'd had no connection to Sterling during the embezzlement period. David Martinez from IT joined them next, his initial skepticism about Marcus's involvement evaporating once he saw the depth of expertise Marcus brought to identifying system vulnerabilities. Together, the 4 of them had worked in secret, shoring up defenses while simultaneously gathering evidence against Sterling. "We've got him," James said, walking into the room with a thick folder. 3 days ago, Sterling accessed the building using a cloned security badge registered to a terminated employee. He didn't know we'd upgraded our systems last week to flag anomalous badge patterns. The system logged his entry and exit, including every door he accessed. Katherine turned from the window, hope and exhaustion warring on her face. Can we prove it was him specifically? Better than that, James said, spreading photos across the conference table. Our new facial recognition system caught clear images at 4 different checkpoints. No hat, no sunglasses, just Marcus Sterling walking through TechVantage like he owned the place. Probably figured you hadn't upgraded security enough to catch him. Marcus leaned over the photos, his expression grim. What was he accessing? Server room, James said. Sub-level storage. In your office, Ms. Chen. He was in there for 12 minutes. Katherine felt violation wash over her like cold water. Her office was supposed to be her sanctuary, the one place in the building that was completely hers. Knowing Sterling had been in there, touching her things, accessing her files, made her skin crawl. What was he looking for? David pulled up security footage on his tablet. Based on the angles, he accessed your computer. He had a USB drive. Probably copying files or installing malware. Can we see what he took? Katherine asked. That's the interesting part, David said. We can't. Because your computer wasn't actually on. You'd shut it down before leaving that night, and it requires biometric login to start. He tried for 8 minutes according to the logs, then gave up. Whatever he was after, he didn't get it. Marcus spoke up quietly. He's getting desperate. First the network sabotage, now breaking into your office directly. He's escalating because his previous attempts haven't worked. That makes him more dangerous but also more likely to make mistakes. Katherine sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. We need to end this. I can't keep working in survival mode, wondering when he'll strike next. We have enough evidence now to go to the police, don't we? James nodded. More than enough. Breaking and entering, corporate espionage, attempted sabotage. Plus the original embezzlement charges from before. He's looking at serious prison time. Then let's do it, Katherine said. Today. I want him arrested, charged, and removed from my life permanently. The meeting broke up with everyone assigned tasks. James would compile the final evidence package for law enforcement. David would secure all systems and change every access code. Katherine would meet with her lawyers to prepare statements and documentation. And Marcus, he offered to stay close in case Sterling made any last desperate moves before the walls closed in. As the others filed out, Marcus lingered. Katherine looked up from the notes she'd been organizing, surprised to find him still there. You don't have to stay, she said. You've done more than enough already. You've got Sophie to get home to. My neighbor has Sophie for a few more hours, Marcus said. And I want to make sure you're safe. Sterling knows his window is closing. If he's been watching the building and notices unusual activity, increased security presence, he might do something reckless. Katherine wanted to argue, to maintain the professional distance that had been eroding steadily over the past 2 weeks of late nights and shared purpose. But the truth was she didn't want to be alone right now. The thought of Sterling out there, watching, planning, possibly violent in his desperation, terrified her in ways she wouldn't admit out loud. Okay, she said simply. Thank you. They spent the morning in her office, Katherine handling calls with lawyers and board members, Marcus monitoring security feeds and access logs for any sign of Sterling's return. Around noon, Janet brought lunch, raising her eyebrows at Marcus's continued presence but saying nothing. The office gossip mill was probably running overtime speculating about the maintenance worker who'd become the CEO's apparent confidant, but Katherine couldn't bring herself to care about appearances anymore. She was tired. Bone deep, soul tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Tired of being strong. Tired of being suspicious. Tired of building walls and maintaining defenses and never letting anyone close enough to see that underneath the tailored suits and commanding presence, she was just someone who wanted to be able to trust again. Katherine, Marcus said, and she realized he'd been saying her name for several seconds. She looked up, pulled from whatever dark spiral her thoughts had been circling. The police are here. Detective Sarah Reeves was in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and an air of competence that immediately put Katherine at ease. She listened to the entire story, reviewed the evidence James had compiled, and asked pointed questions that demonstrated she understood both the technical aspects and the personal stakes involved. "This is solid work," Detective Reeves said finally. "More than enough for an arrest warrant. Do you know where Sterling is currently staying?" "No," Katherine admitted. "We've been focused on securing the building and gathering evidence. We haven't tried to track his movements outside TechVantage." "That's probably smart," Detective Reeves said. "Tracking a suspect yourself can get dangerous and can complicate prosecution if it looks like harassment. Let us handle locating him. With this evidence, we'll have him in custody within 48 hours. "And in the meantime?" Katherine asked. "What if he tries something else?" "We'll station an officer in the building," Detective Reeves said. "Plain clothes, blending in with normal security. And I'd recommend you vary your routine. Don't leave at the same time every day, don't park in the same spot, consider staying somewhere other than your residence for a few nights." Katherine nodded, her mind already racing through logistics. She could stay at a hotel, somewhere anonymous and secure. Or maybe with her mother, though that would involve explanations she didn't have energy for. "You can stay at my place," Marcus said, and everyone turned to look at him. He didn't waver under the attention. "I have a couch. Sophie loves company. And Sterling doesn't know who I am or where I live. It's probably the safest option." Detective Reeves looked between them, clearly trying to gauge the nature of their relationship and whether this was appropriate. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks but held Marcus's gaze. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose, especially on Sophie." "Sophie will be thrilled," Marcus said with a slight smile. "She's been asking when the nice lady with the plant is coming to visit again." Katherine blinked. "How does Sophie know about the plant?" "Because I might have mentioned you've been taking good care of it," Marcus admitted. "And because 7-year-olds notice everything and ask endless questions." Despite everything, Katherine laughed. "Okay," she said. "If you're really sure, I'd appreciate it. Just for a night or two until Sterling is in custody." After Detective Reeves left with promises to keep them updated, Katherine and Marcus began preparing to leave. She packed a bag with basics from the emergency kit she kept in her office for late nights, added her laptop and some files, and looked around at the space that had been her domain for years. It felt strange to be leaving it behind, even temporarily. Like retreating from a battlefield she thought she'd already won. They took separate cars to Marcus's apartment, Katherine following his older Honda through afternoon traffic. The neighborhood looked different in daylight, less stark, almost welcoming with its tree-lined streets and children playing in small yards. She parked near his building and grabbed her overnight bag, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked in her designer suit and heels. Marcus was waiting at the building entrance. "Ready?" he asked, and she nodded, following him up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was apparently broken again. The hallway smelled like cooking spices and someone's laundry detergent, human and lived in a way her sterile apartment building never managed. He unlocked the door to apartment 3C, and immediately a small whirlwind in a purple shirt and jeans launched herself at him. "Daddy!" Sophie shouted, wrapping her arms around his legs. "Mrs. Rodriguez said you were bringing a friend home. Is it the plant lady?" "Her name is Ms. Chen," Marcus said gently, glancing at Katherine. "And yes, this is her. She's going to stay with us for a couple of days." Sophie turned to Katherine, her brown eyes wide and curious. "Are you in trouble? Is someone being mean to you?" The directness of children was startling. Katherine crouched down to Sophie's level, something she'd never done with any child before. "Sort of," she admitted. "But your dad is helping me, and everything is going to be okay." Sophie nodded seriously. "My dad helps lots of people. He's really good at it. You're lucky he likes you." Sophie, Marcus said, his tone gentle but warning. Why don't you show Miss Chen where she can put her bag? The apartment was small but carefully maintained. The living room held a worn couch, a coffee table covered in Sophie's art supplies, and a bookshelf overflowing with a mix of children's books and dense technical manuals. The kitchen was tiny but spotlessly clean, and Katherine could see into a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms and a bathroom. Everything about the space spoke of someone making the most of limited resources with dignity and care. You can have my room, Sophie announced, grabbing Katherine's hand and pulling her down the hallway. I'll sleep with Daddy. It'll be like camping. Sophie, Marcus called after them, we discussed this. I'm taking the couch. You're staying in your room, and Ms. Chen can have my room. But Daddy, Sophie protested. No buts, Marcus said firmly. Ms. Chen is our guest, and guests get proper beds, not couches. Katherine found herself in Marcus's bedroom, a space barely large enough for a double bed, a small dresser, and a narrow closet. Everything was neat, almost military in its order. The only personal touches were a photo of Sophie on the dresser and a stack of books on the nightstand, a mixture of thrillers and dense academic texts about cybersecurity. I can't take your bed, Katherine said, returning to the living room where Marcus was already pulling sheets and blankets from a closet. The couch is fine for me. The couch has broken springs and questionable lumps, Marcus said. You're not sleeping there. This isn't negotiable, Ms. Chen. Katherine, she corrected. If I'm staying in your home, you should probably call me Katherine. He paused in his sheet spreading, looked at her, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement of crossing a line, of moving from professional to personal in ways that couldn't be easily reversed. Katherine, he said, testing the name. Okay. Then you should probably stop calling me Marcus Hayes and use just Marcus. Or Mark if we're being really informal. Mark, Katherine tried, and found she liked how it sounded. Less formal. More human. Okay, Mark. But I still feel guilty about taking your bed. Don't, he said. You've had people breaking into your office and sabotaging your company. The least I can do is give you a safe place to sleep for a few nights. That evening was surreal in the best possible way. Sophie insisted Katherine help make dinner, which turned out to be spaghetti with sauce from a jar and a bagged salad, simple but made with love. They ate at the small kitchen table, Sophie chattering about school and her best friend Emma who could do a cartwheel, and Katherine found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. Maybe years. After dinner, Sophie pulled out a board game, something about collecting dragons, and insisted they all play. Katherine couldn't remember the last time she'd played a board game. Maybe college? Maybe childhood? The rules were simple but Sophie took them very seriously, correcting both adults when they forgot details and celebrating victories with uninhibited joy. When bedtime arrived, Sophie asked Katherine to read her a story. Marcus looked uncertain, like maybe this was crossing a line, but Katherine found herself saying yes before he could object. They settled on Sophie's bed, the girl in her unicorn pajamas, Katherine still in her work clothes minus the heels, and together they read about a princess who saved herself instead of waiting for rescue. Halfway through, Sophie leaned against Katherine's shoulder, warm and trusting, and Katherine felt something crack open in her chest. She'd never particularly wanted children. Her career had always been her focus, her company her baby. But sitting here with this small person who smelled like strawberry shampoo and trusted so easily, Katherine understood why people chose this. Why they built lives around these vulnerable, precious beings who needed protection and love and someone to read them stories about princesses who saved themselves. When Sophie finally fell asleep, Katherine carefully extracted herself and found Marcus waiting in the hallway. She was out before the princess defeated the dragon, Katherine whispered, and he smiled. She does that, he said. Gets so excited about the story that she forgets she's supposed to stay awake for the ending. They moved to the living room, speaking quietly to avoid waking Sophie. Marcus made tea, some herbal blend that reminded Katherine of the one her grandmother used to make, and they sat on opposite ends of the couch, the evening news playing silently on a small television neither of them was really watching. Thank you for this, Katherine said. For letting me invade your home, disrupt your routine. You're not invading, Marcus said. And honestly, it's nice having another adult to talk to. I love Sophie more than anything, but conversations about unicorns and playground drama can only sustain a person for so long. Katherine smiled. She's amazing. You're doing an incredible job with her. Some days, Marcus admitted. Other days I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm terrified I'm messing her up, that she'll grow up and realize her dad was just faking competence the entire time. I doubt that, Katherine said. She adores you. That's obvious in how she looks at you, talks about you. You're her whole world. That's what scares me, Marcus said quietly. What if my world isn't enough? What if she grows up and resents the small apartment, the second-hand clothes, the fact that her dad pushes a mop instead of wearing a suit to an office? Katherine was quiet for a moment, thinking about her own childhood. Her father had worn suits to an office. He'd made good money, provided well, given her every material advantage. And she'd barely known him. He'd died when she was 16, and at the funeral, she'd realized she had no idea what he'd actually liked, what he'd dreamed about, what had made him laugh. He'd been a provider, not a presence. Sophie won't resent any of that, Katherine said finally. She'll remember that you read her stories and played board games and stood in the rain so she could stay dry. That's what matters. That's what she'll carry with her. Marcus looked at her, really looked, and Katherine felt exposed in a way that should have been uncomfortable but wasn't. How did you get so wise? He asked. By making every possible mistake first, Katherine said with a bitter laugh. By prioritizing all the wrong things and waking up one day realizing I'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. You're building one now, Marcus said gently. Might be a little late and a little messy, but you're trying. That counts for something. Katherine's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. A text from Detective Reeves. Have a location on Sterling. Moving to make arrest tomorrow morning. Will update when in custody. She showed the message to Marcus, and they both exhaled relief. Tomorrow, Katherine said. This all ends tomorrow. Beginning, Marcus corrected. Tomorrow this part ends. Then you get to figure out what comes after. What do you think comes after? Katherine asked. He smiled. Whatever you want. That's the thing about surviving something like this. You get to choose who you want to be on the other side. That night, Katherine lay in Marcus's bed, surrounded by his things, his scent, his life, and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Sterling being arrested. About Tech Vantage becoming secure again. About returning to her penthouse apartment with its empty rooms and expensive furniture. About going back to a life where she knew how to be a CEO but had forgotten how to be a person. And she thought about Sophie's warm weight against her shoulder. About Marcus's quiet competence and unexpected wisdom. About playing board games and reading bedtime stories and drinking tea on a broken couch. About how the smallest apartment she'd ever been in somehow felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the kind of rest she hadn't experienced since before the embezzlement. She woke to morning light filtering through thin curtains and the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she heard Sophie's laughter from the kitchen and Marcus's deeper voice responding, and remembered everything. Katherine, dressed in yesterday's clothes, ran her fingers through her hair in lieu of a proper styling, and emerged to find the kitchen table set with mismatched plates holding pancakes shaped like animals. Sophie beamed at her. Daddy makes pancakes on special days, and having you here is special. They ate breakfast together, and Katherine found herself helping Sophie cut her bunny-shaped pancake, wiping syrup from small fingers, participating in the domestic choreography of family breakfast in ways she'd never imagined herself doing. Marcus caught her eye over Sophie's head and smiled, something warm and knowing passing between them. Katherine's phone rang around 9. Detective Reeves. We have Sterling in custody, the detective said without preamble. Picked him up at a motel in Tacoma. He had a storage unit nearby full of equipment for accessing computer systems, documents related to TechVantage, and a rather disturbing amount of surveillance photos of you specifically. Katherine felt cold. Photos of me? Outside your building, in the parking garage, walking to your car. Nothing illegal technically, but definitely concerning. Combined with everything else, the prosecutor is confident we can make charges stick. He won't be bothering you again. After hanging up, Katherine relayed the news to Marcus. His expression darkened at the mention of the photos, but he simply nodded. It's over then. You're safe. Safe, Katherine repeated, testing the word. It felt foreign, like a language she'd once known but had forgotten how to speak fluently. She looked around the small apartment, at Sophie now watching cartoons on the couch, at Marcus cleaning breakfast dishes at the sink, and realized that safety wasn't just about physical security. It was about trust. About knowing that the people around you weren't waiting for opportunities to hurt you. I should probably go home, Katherine said, though the words felt hollow. Get back to normal life. Marcus turned from the sink, drying his hands on a towel. What does normal life look like for you? Katherine opened her mouth to answer, then realized she didn't know. Before Sterling's betrayal, normal had been 14-hour workdays and client dinners and board meetings. After the betrayal, it had been the same but with added paranoia and isolation. Now, with Sterling in custody and the immediate threat gone, she had no idea what normal was supposed to be. I don't know anymore, she admitted. Sophie appeared at her elbow, having abandoned the cartoons. Will you come back? She asked. To visit? I like when you're here. Katherine crouched down, meeting Sophie's eyes. I'd like that. If your dad says it's okay. Sophie turned to Marcus. Daddy, is it okay if Katherine comes to visit sometimes? Yes, Mark said, his gaze on Katherine rather than his daughter. That would be more than okay. The rest of the day passed in a strange suspension of reality. Katherine knew she should leave, should return to her penthouse and her office in her regular life. But every time she started to gather her things, something stopped her. Sophie asking her opinion on a drawing. Marcus suggesting they watch a movie together. The simple comfort of being in a space where she wasn't CEO Katherine Chen but just Katherine, someone who could be useful and present without having to perform competence and control. Evening came before she expected it, and suddenly Marcus was making dinner again, this time with Katherine actually helping rather than just watching. They moved around the small kitchen with surprising coordination, and when their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same utensil, neither pulled away immediately. After dinner, after Sophie was in bed, they sat on the couch again, this time closer than the night before. The television was off. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient sounds of other people living their lives in adjacent units. Katherine had her shoes off, her feet tucked under her, and she was wearing one of Marcus's sweatshirts because the apartment was chilly and he'd offered without her having to ask. I should go home, Katherine said for the third time that day. You should, Marcus agreed, but he didn't move to help her gather her things. They sat in comfortable silence, and Katherine found herself saying, I don't want to. Go home, I mean. I don't want to go back to that empty apartment and that perfect kitchen I never cook in and that view of a city full of people I don't really know. So don't, Marcus said simply. Not tonight. Stay. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. And Katherine, who'd built a career on decisive action and never showing uncertainty, did something completely unlike herself. She stayed. She let herself be talked into watching a late movie with Marcus, their shoulders touching, her head eventually dropping to rest against him. She let herself fall asleep there, safe and warm, without planning or strategizing or maintaining control. When she woke in the early morning hours, Marcus had somehow maneuvered them both so she was lying properly on the couch, a blanket tucked around her, while he dozed in the armchair nearby. She watched him sleep, this man who'd given her his bed, his time, his wisdom, asking nothing in return except that she allow herself to be helped. The morning brought reality in the form of her phone, multiple missed calls from her assistant and board members, messages that the Sterling arrest was already making news and everyone wanted statements and reassurance in Katherine's immediate attention. The bubble of suspended time burst, and she was CEO Katherine Chen again, needed and responsible and very much not someone who could hide in a modest apartment playing house. Marcus woke when she sat up, immediately alert in the way of parents and former security professionals. "Everything okay?" "Work needs me," Katherine said, already mentally shifting back into executive mode. "I have to go handle the fallout from Sterling's arrest. Make sure the board and the media understand this doesn't reflect poorly on TechVantage's current security." "Of course," Marcus said, standing and stretching. "I should get Sophie ready for school anyway." They moved through morning routines, awkward now with the spell broken, both aware that something had shifted but neither sure what it meant going forward. Katherine changed back into her work clothes, packed her overnight bag, and met Marcus at the door while Sophie finished breakfast in the kitchen. "Thank you," Katherine said. "For everything. For keeping me safe, for letting me be part of your life for these few days. I won't forget it." "You're welcome anytime," Marcus said. "And Katherine," he hesitated, then continued, "you don't have to go back to being alone. You know that, right? You've got people now. Me, Sophie, even Janet and James and the others who've been helping. You don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore." Katherine felt tears threatening, which was ridiculous. She didn't cry. Hadn't cried except for that one breakdown in her car, and that had been an anomaly. But standing here in Marcus's doorway, preparing to leave this pocket of safety and normalcy, she felt the weight of isolation she'd been carrying for years pressing down on her shoulders. "I don't know how," she admitted. "To not be alone. To trust people. To let them in without wondering when they're going to hurt me." "Practice," Marcus said gently. "Like anything else worth doing, you practice until it gets easier." Katherine left before she could say anything else, before she could admit how much she didn't want to go, before she could make this more complicated than it already was. She drove to her penthouse, showered and changed into a fresh suit, and arrived at TechVantage by 8, slipping back into her role as effortlessly as putting on familiar armor. The next 3 weeks were chaos. Media inquiries about Sterling's arrest and the attempted sabotage. Board meetings to reassure investors that security had been compromised but was now stronger than ever. Depositions and police interviews and legal proceedings. Katherine handled it all with her usual competence, projecting confidence and control, letting nothing show of the turmoil underneath. She didn't go back to Marcus's apartment. Told herself it was because she was too busy, because the crisis required her full attention, because returning would be inappropriate given their professional relationship. But really, she knew she was afraid. Afraid of wanting something she couldn't control. Afraid of needing someone. Afraid of building something fragile and precious only to have it shattered like everything else she tried to hold on to. But she saw him in the building. Brief glimpses in hallways, him pushing his cart, her rushing between meetings. They'd nod, exchange quick greetings, and move on. And every time, Katherine felt the ache of missing something she'd barely had, mourning a possibility she'd walked away from before fully exploring it. Sophie sent her drawings through Marcus. Bright crayon pictures of 3 figures, always 3, doing various activities. Having picnics. Flying kites. Simply standing together under that persistent umbrella. Each one was accompanied by careful lettering that spelled out "come back soon" or "we miss you" or simply "Katherine" with a heart. She kept every single one in her desk drawer and looked at them more often than she'd ever admit. On a Friday evening exactly 3 weeks after Sterling's arrest, Katherine found herself alone in the executive lounge again. Most of the staff had gone home. The building was settling into its nighttime rhythm. And Katherine stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Seattle and wondering what the point of conquering a city was if you had no one to share the view with. She heard the familiar squeak of cartwheels and turned to find Marcus in the doorway, exactly like that first night. But this time, there was no testing, no suspicion. Just recognition and something deeper that neither of them had named yet. "Working late?" he asked, and she heard the echo of every other time he'd said those words, back when he was just the invisible maintenance worker and she was the CEO who didn't see him. Avoiding home, she admitted. It's too quiet there. Marcus left his card in the hallway and stepped into the room. Katherine, he said, and there was weight to how he said her name. We need to talk. Her heart sped up. About what? About the fact that Sophie asks about you every single day. About the fact that I find myself looking for you in hallways like a teenager with a crush. About the fact that you've been avoiding me for 3 weeks, and I don't know if it's because you regret what happened between us or because you're scared of what might happen next. Katherine turned back to the windows, unable to face him while admitting this. I'm terrified, she said. Of caring about someone again. Of trusting that they won't disappear or betray me or prove to be something other than what they seem. I'm so tired of being scared, Mark, but I don't know how to stop. She felt him move closer, felt his presence at her back. Then be scared, he said quietly. Be terrified. But don't let that fear steal the possibility of something good. What if it falls apart? She asked. What if I'm not capable of being what you and Sophie need? What if I'm too damaged, too cynical, too broken? Then we'll be broken together, Marcus said. And maybe we'll figure out how to heal. Or maybe we won't, and that's okay too. But Katherine, he paused, you can't go through life never taking risks just because you might get hurt. That's not protection. That's just a slower kind of dying. She turned to face him, tears finally spilling over, no longer caring about maintaining composure. I don't know how to do this. How to be in someone's life. How to be part of a family. How to be anything except a CEO. You already know, Marcus said, reaching up to gently wipe tears from her cheeks. You played board games with Sophie. You read her bedtime stories. You helped make pancakes. You just have to choose to keep doing those things instead of running back to isolation every time it feels too vulnerable. Katherine closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. What if I'm terrible at it? Then you'll practice, he said. Same as I told you about trusting people. You practice until it gets easier. She opened her eyes and found him watching her with such patience, such understanding, like he could wait forever for her to find her courage. I miss you, she whispered. Both of you. Your terrible couch and Sophie's endless questions and feeling like maybe I belonged somewhere. You do belong somewhere, Marcus said. With us. If you want that. If you're brave enough to choose it. And Katherine Chen, who'd built an empire through ruthless decision-making and refusing to show weakness, made the most terrifying and brave choice of her life. Yes, she said. I want that. I want you. I want Sophie. I want terrible couches and board games and feeling like part of something real. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that transformed his whole face, and pulled her into a hug. She wrapped her arms around him and let herself be held, let herself be vulnerable, let herself believe that maybe, possibly, she could have both the empire and the life. They stood that way for a long time, and when they finally pulled apart, Katherine said, I should probably actually ask Sophie if she wants me around before I assume I'm invited into her life. Sophie's had a list ready for weeks of things she wants to do when you come back, Marcus said with a laugh. Starting with teaching you to make actual pancakes, not just help cut them. Apparently you need serious training. Katherine laughed, the sound genuine and light. Okay, she said. Then let's start there. Pancake lessons. And maybe I can show Sophie my office, let her see where I work. She'd love that, Marcus said. Though fair warning, she'll probably reorganize everything and suggest you need more color on the walls. I think, Katherine said, looking around the executive lounge that had been the site of so much testing and revelation, I think I could use more color in a lot of places. They left the building together that night, Marcus's shift ending, Katherine choosing to leave early for once. They walked to the parking garage, and at her car, Katherine hesitated before getting in. Tomorrow, she said. Can I come over tomorrow? For pancakes and whatever else Sophie has planned? We'll be waiting, Marcus said. And Katherine, he added as she unlocked her door. Thank you for being brave enough to try this. I know it's not easy for you. Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me to figure it out, Katherine replied. She drove home that night with Sophie's drawings on the passenger seat and a tentative hope blooming in her chest. The penthouse was still empty when she arrived, still perfect and sterile and lonely. But tomorrow, she'd wake up early and drive to Beacon Hill. Tomorrow, she'd learn to make pancakes with a 7-year-old teacher. Tomorrow, she'd start building something that wasn't an empire or a fortress but simply a life. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.